this is a first track breakdown by me, and it's about the latest tune that's going to be out in about 6 days from when I'm recording this on platform. And I wanted to take this opportunity to explain a bit about the process of production and sound design, and a couple of things that I found interesting regarding mostly synths. We're going to be dealing with synths and some effects, but mostly this lead synth and the supporting synth. So yeah, let's take a listen to what we're working with and dive into the sound design. Okay, so that's the first part of the track, and let's go through these synths, which are quite interesting in the processing department, since the patches are quite simple. Basically, these three synths should act as one. So yeah, these three synths are all the same patch, but with different processing. As you can see, the patch is quite simple. I won't open all of them because it's the same thing. The patch is quite simple. It's just two oscillators. I don't know why it's random here all the way up. It's probably been tweaked to 0 at the final mix, but anyway, it's just basic shape sine wave, which is FM'd by the oscillator B, which is a wavetable that's called harmonic series. You can find it in the digital way, stock wavetables from Serum. Tube distortion, because why not, everyone loves tube distortion, and this macro, which I've decided not to use. So yeah, is fairly simple, and let's hear the patch without any processing. There is although some processing with the automation of the level of the FM. So basically it's sine waves, and then what happens after, it's interesting. So I've got quite a few chains here. So let's go through them. This applies to all of the three synths because, again, I wanted to have them sound as one big synth, which will complement each other in terms of frequency response. So I have first chain, which is basically just this EQ with a high pass on and a high shelf, where I'm reducing around 5.3K. Yeah, to make room for the sub and to make room for the heads. I don't want any of that top end there. Well, not any, but I don't want as much top end there because there's barely any information there to begin with sine waves. So on it by itself, it's just this. And after that, let's turn off the processing after. Yeah, after that I've got this chain of bass amp, which is giving just the body. You can hear how it really works together. This one works a lot more at the low end and gives it nice body. It's really quiet. If we turned it up, it works. Oh, but for the sake of mix, I kept it quiet because I have already a lot of information in that part of frequency spectrum. And where the distortion happens, it's right here with just one stock plugin from Ableton, which is called Amp Simulator. And I've used this heavy option and mono, and I pushed the volume up, and then I reduced the middle range and left a bit of bass and treble, because the main idea of this chain was to get that mid saturation gritty sound, that sort of like a guitar distortion. So it works well with other two chains. Yeah, and after that I've got another chain, which is saturation again, but just a lower. So I'm saturating a low mids here, and then I'm mixing everything together and getting this. Yeah, we have two more chains which just occur at a couple of bits of the track, which are hybrid reverb from Ableton. And it's sort of like impulse response. If you're familiar with the guitar plugins, then you know what impulse response is. And yeah, I tend to use quite a few guitar plugins, let's say, because I've been playing the instruments for most of my life. They're quite subtle and occur just twice in the whole track, or 3 times at this particular place. Yeah, with the arpeggiator, which is another interesting thing. At the second drop, I've been using arpeggiator, and this one is particularly interesting for me because it goes really wide and sort of sounds like a bit granulary. Yeah, so anyway, after this processing, after these first, how many, 6 chains? So actually 4 main chains and 2 reverb chains, which, yeah. I've added another instance of EQ, again, because after every processing, especially after every saturation, distortion, overdrive, etc., I'd like to add another EQ, because it tends to boost the frequencies I don't want to be boosted. So I just control my range with EQ. After that, I've got this compressor, which isn't really doing anything, to be honest. It's just there as a safety measure. The signal isn't strong enough to reach this compressor at this point. And yeah, after that, more processing. This chain is just empty, and this one is a resonator, I believe, which is cool. It gives that top end thing. It's a bit more interesting and powerful with this chain on, although it's not 100% wet, but yeah, it could be 100% wet. It's also interesting. So after this chain, I've got an instance of multiband compression where I'm boosting lows a bit and mid and tops and mids just tiny bit, and then this auto filter, and then after this I've got a multiband compression isotope trash, and yeah, that's basically it. The thing with this isotope trash plugin here is that it boosts the whole levels up a lot. So instead of boosting the gain, we're just boosting the gain again, but with saturation. So you can see what I'm talking about when I say it boosts frequencies they weren't even there to begin with. So at the final mix I would do something like this with linear phase, and I would cut the low end after I apply saturation. And why I would switch on the linear phase is because if I don't, oftentimes the phasing occurs after you introduce the high pass filter. So to make sure that my sub isn't phasing with this synth, I'm gonna switch on the linear phase. And yeah, that would be it. There are some automations going on. Volume wise, here I've boosted it just a bit, and the auto filter, it's ducking here and then it's going down in the whole second drop. Yeah, let's see what else is there. The plate reverb, and from Serum there's just pitch bend, basically. And a warp, which is FM from B, which everybody loves. So yeah, the thing with the arpeggiator is at the final mixdown of the track, I thought this was becoming a bit dull and repetitive, this synth stab. So instead of this, I added this. So you could add it anywhere, basically. Yeah, and then I'm automating the rate just here. And I'm automating the gate. Which makes a huge difference. It's closing the sound a lot more and making it a lot more punchy. So yeah, you could play with that all day. This sounds cool, actually. Yeah. That's pretty much it regarding the processing of this synth. These are all grouped and then sent to the sidechain bus. And this particular track, I've decided to do sidechain with a couple of different things. I usually like to do sidechain with volume automations. To kick especially, here's my kick, which is a serum kick. There is no processing because I already bounced it and processed it. There's just this a bit of a cut here, which I do most of the time on kicks because I just don't like this area of kicks very much. And yeah, the sidechaining for kicks is made with utility and gain automation. So I just renamed this utility plugin to kick, so I know it's sidechain to kick, and snare, which I haven't used. I used, but then after I decided not to use it because I've got this instance of glue compressor which is doing the job, and then I've got this another compressor which is just doing the sidechaining at the build-up. Yeah, and I'm automating the threshold so the sidechaining gets more obvious closer to this break. Yeah, these other two synths are fairly similar. This one and this one go together, and they sound like this. And without this one, it's quite interesting. If you push the random all the way down, yeah. This one is just a mid synth, very distorted, which basically pushes the mid signal a lot, and the processing is completely the same, except for the last part where I'm cutting the low end and then I'm cutting the low, the fundamental, and the high end. So I'm basically getting rid of the top end because I already got that here. And yeah, that's the only difference. The patch is the same, the processing it's pretty much the same. I'm just limiting the frequency range of the sound. And lastly, I've got this lead, which is being heavily filtered, which makes it different from the first couple of synths, which are basically just stab synths, which come every 4 bars. And yeah, this one is the main one, and the processing is pretty much the same. Yeah, it's the same. I'm just cutting the low end with the linear phase because this one is playing with the sub, and it was quite a challenge to nail this sub with this chord progression, because so many sine waves and so much signal being pushed very loud, and then your subjective perceiving of the tone might be a bit weird. I don't know if this makes too much sense, but when you're playing with sine waves and you're playing a lot of voices, obviously there's some distortion going on, which can drastically change your perceived tone and pitch. I'm talking about micro pitch and fine tuning. Not, it couldn't change for a step or two. That's not what I'm saying, but it could sound a little bit off at some points. Even though the notes you're playing are correct, they could sound off. So the sub it's very simple patch because it's a simple track with, in my opinion, some nice character to it and some interesting ideas. And I like simple music, and most of my patches are quite simple because I work mostly with sine waves and saw waves 95% of the time, and then I create sort of a harmonic series of sine wavetables which I use. So getting these two to work together was a bit tricky. And what's another very nice thing with sine waves, it's the movement you get with different chords. Yeah, it sounds different, and you haven't done anything much, but it's just the notes you play make it sound different. And I've got this automation for the amount of FM from the oscillator. Yeah, if you push it too hard, it goes a bit crazy, but if you keep it around here, it's very nice. And yeah, I draw the modulation throughout the track to keep it interesting. I like to use a lot of automation, and I actually prefer it rather than mapping stuff to LFOs, because I get more control over very specific things by doing automations. Anyway, we can move on to the lead sound, which is very dependent on these sounds and sub, because on its own, not much, right? But with this, it's quite nice. And this is just the bounce of this lead, which I put through hybrid reverb and a large space chorus, which I really love. It's just Ableton's preset for reverb, which I tend to use a lot. And then let's see the patch. I did this patch with Wavetable, which is not even new anymore, but new-ish plugin from Ableton. It's a wavetable synth similar to Serum, and I barely use it, to be honest, but in this case, for some reason, I said, fuck it, let's go with wavetable. Probably when you're stuck with some ideas using same synths over and over again, you just like to change the interface of synth you're working with, so it might gives you a way out of the writer's block, which happened. Fortunately, it's just two oscillators, monophonic sound, which means you cannot play chords with this. It's because I wanted to make this like a retro sounding synth. Monophonic is one of the ways to do it, which means you can play only one note at a time, which sounds very limiting, but for leads, it's quite cool. So I have two oscillators with basic wave shapes, so you can change the position of the shape, which is cool because unlike, well, you could do it in Serum as well, but if you change to spectral crossfade, but here it's by default you don't have to settle for just one, another. You know, you can change and it slowly modulates between them, which is kind of cool. So then I used a bandpass. So I cut the lows, cut the highs, and I just left the mids, and then the ADSR is just a long decay, and without the processing, it doesn't sound very nice. So let's see. It's a disaster without the processing, to be honest. Yeah, complete disaster. But with processing, it's slowly getting better. So let's see these first three chains. This is output thermal, which is basically a saturator and an EQ in this instance. It's making it more mid heavy, and I've got another chain of texture with this stereo vinyl crack, and lastly this reverb chain, which just happens here. Yeah, and in the intro as well. So let's see. After that we got some compression, sidechain compression, which isn't routed to anything. I decided not to use it after. EQing. I just wanted to make a mellow vintage sounding synth, and I didn't want as much of the top end because I already have it here a lot, and here. So I'm trying to make a contrast. If I push all synths in top end, then it will be just complete chaos in the top end, and it will be very difficult to listen and tell apart the elements in the track. Yeah, after that I've got the RC instance, which is doing some processing. The wobble is just like a vinyl detune, the distortion, and these two are quite cool, but you have to tweak it a bit to get it right. This flutter thing I really love, because it stutters the sound. And the digital thing, it gives it a bit more bite, and then I'm pushing a bit the high end for a couple of dBs, which I reduced here, but I brought it back here. And yeah, some automations because I want the sound to completely stop at some point. And I don't want any tails here, and etc, etc. That's why I'm adding this utility instance, just to cut everything and to boost it at the tails when I need it. So after that, another EQ just to cut the lows, and Saturn, which is my patch, quite simple. I'm using the warm tape and boosting the top end for around 3.5 dBs. And I'm using warm tape by 27% on both bands. Again, another chain, which is just an EQ after the saturation, and a reverb chain. Which is quite wide and reminds me a bit of some strings. And then after we got well, this is off. Actually, it's not off. We got another instance of EQ, but just auto filter. Where I'm adding this PRD drive and boosting the whole signal and cutting the low end. The kilohertz tape stop effect, which is quite cool, which I add at one part of the track, which sounds like this. With this effect, it's one of my favorites. It's a really clever way to finish off some phrases and begin new ones. And I just added this EQ just to see if there's anything left to cut at the low end. But there wasn't, so basically I used it as a analyzer. This is where it's a bit interesting. The gate, which happens only once here, and it's gated to this channel, which is my hi-hat, and then it's triggering the gain of the synth. So the synth is following the hi-hat. And then I'm automating the threshold. That's it. And then I've got an instance of vinyl, which is running at the intro. Just to make a bit of a contrast between the synth in intro and the synth at the drop. And after that, lastly, I'm doing some multi-band compression just to push the top end, just to get it a bit more crisp top end. So yeah. It's not a massive difference, but it does cut through the mix a bit better, in my opinion, with 3 dBs of input at the top end. And yeah, those are all of this, well, pretty much all of the synths. I've bounced this synth a couple of times. Let's see yeah, this one. This is the effect I wanted to talk about. It's just a noise effect. But it does make the drop punch harder. So let's hear it without this effect. And now let's hear it with the effect. Yeah, it works nicely with this synth. it's a simple patch. It's just a white noise. Let's hear it without any processing. It's just sidechained white noise with some volume automation. And then what I like to do with these types of effects, I like to add the auto pan and play with the amount and rate and shape. Yeah, it's very nice effect in my opinion, as long as you tweak it a bit. You can make it more stereo, more mono, you can push the amount and play with the rate. And I usually don't do fixed rate because I want it to be free, because it's a lot more fun that way, because you can play with it and not be on grid all the time. Because it's cool to have a couple of elements of the track not be on the grid. That's what they give it the track life and sort of a human feeling to it. Then there's just chain without anything and reverb chain. And I did sidechaining here as well, as I sent it to the sidechain bus. And lastly, I did the EQ. So yeah, there are a couple of more synths I wanted to go, actually effects I wanted to go through. These three. Yeah, it's sine waves again, with fine tuning as a pitch bend and the LFO modulation. Which gives it this bubbly jungle riser effect, which is quite cool. And then I did the stereo processing with AutoPen and added OTT, which doesn't do much, but just boosts it up through the mix a bit. Yeah, this is just simple noise uplifter, and the last one is quite interesting. Yeah, it's my patch that it's made from one instance of operator, the other one isn't working. So again, it's a sine wave with LFO modulation and filter modulation and FM modulation from the oscillator B, which is pitched here, and then oscillator C again, and there are different envelopes on each one of them. So yeah, let's turn off the processing. It's barely anything without the processing, but here is where the sound happens. Yeah, is the heavy tube effect track with a couple of macros. and then I'm doing the automation on a lot of stuff. For a fairly simple and barely audible sound, I'm doing quite a few things because I really like this sound. So let's hear it in context. You can barely hear it. But it's there, and it gives the feeling of something's gonna happen, and that's why it's cool. So yeah, this is the rack, which gives it most of the sound, and then after that there is I played a bit with different chains, but I just ended up using one chain and Huss, which is a delay effect, basically, left and right delay effect. So I just did the stereo with it. So you can do this exact same thing with a line delay from Ableton, which I cannot find now. Yeah. With this one. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about in this breakdown. Another interesting thing with this track is that it's got a modulation at the second drop. The first drop is in D minor and the second one is in F minor. Why? Because when I was writing this tune, I couldn't get the sub bass to sit right at in the key of D. Because it's quite low, and it was quite frustrating, as it always is, until you get it right. And then I transposed the entire track to F. So I just decided to keep both and to have a modulation in this track, which is not something you see very often in electronic music. But I liked it, and I thought it was very natural for this track, especially with this bridge. It was difficult to decide to where I'm gonna modulate the track. And yeah, this is exactly where the track goes from D to B with this piano. And this is the reason I find this track interesting, because of this switch at the bridge, which catches you a bit off guard, but it does sound natural to my ears, and it sounds quite nice, to be honest, because it's unexpected, but yet it's not an unpleasant surprise. And lastly, maybe we could mention this interesting effect, which is here. Yeah, this one. I really like this sound. There are a lot of breaks, like small breaks in the whole track, after each 8 bars, there's sort of a break ish, and I needed some fillers for these breaks, but not necessarily instruments but effects. So I made this out of 2 chains, this sort of laser effect. So it's basically it without the processing even. Yeah, it's just 2 chains. One is more noisy than the other, and one is the sine wave, which is modulated, and then the LFO is automated, and I made a couple of macros. Yeah, here, this one. Yeah, and another one which is also, yeah, being modulated. And then I've got this heavy tube audio effect track, which just gives it a bit of room, which is quite nice. And lastly, just a chain. I experimented the same way I did with other effects, but ended up using just the chain. And again, the filter and a gain automation, which works as a sidechain, basically. A couple of instances of this track, like here. So yeah, that would be everything I wanted to cover in this breakdown. Hopefully you get something cool out of it, some processing techniques, and I really like to use simple wave shapes and simple sounds and then try to make something strange with it after, because the thing is with complex wavetables, it's always a bit of a scare, let's say, what you're gonna get when you play them. You're never quite certain. It's a lot of information containing, and sine waves are just very easy to work with, but in another sense very tricky to work with, because if you place too many of them, then you get a lot of distortion, and you need to find a way to control this beautiful distortion of sine waves. Yeah, that would be all for this breakdown. Yeah, go listen to the track when it comes out and enjoy it.